Yes, you're very welcome along to the Huddle Breakdown, episode 73. The
Wow.
first time that I've actually looked at the amount of episodes that we've recorded, because as I said on the Twitter feed last night, this is the first episode of the Huddle Breakdown that Celtic are top of the league. A phenomenal stat when you actually think about the amount of stats that are on the show. I think that might just be my favorite. Alan, James, how happy have you been the last
I,
24 hours?
I'm
Because
I,
I've
I,
been
I'm
ecstatic.
I'm shocked, Enda, to hear this all because I took you as kind of a traditionalist, more of a missionary guy who would be on top all the time. And for this to be the first time you've been on top, this is amazing. It's remarkable. Congratulations.
It feels brilliant. It feels excellent to break free of the monotony of being on bottom. No,
I'm really happy, Enda, that you're just ignoring him and plowing on. fair play to you.
listen, guys, we were talking off air briefly before we started. This feels different to most of the Derby wins that have happened over the last couple of weeks. If you think of the journey it took to get here, to get to top of the league at this point in time, it's been a long time coming. But, and I'm going to put this to you, Alan, at the start, this didn't feel like a 1-0 win or a usual Derby win where it's cagey for the first 20 minutes and you just bed into the game and eventually you go on to just be the better team over the course of the 90 minutes. This seemed like a real momentum switch. This seemed officially Celtic are the best team in Scotland and they are the best team by a mile.
Yeah, no, I think that, yeah, we just chatted about that. Because before the game, I tend to get crippled with this thing mentally, where I can genuinely see all sides of every argument, and I can always come up with 10 reasons why we're going to win and 10 reasons why we're going to lose, and all this sort of thing. And being honest, I expected I thought we could win. I thought because underlying performance stats suggest Celtic are the better team, right? Very clearly, and have done all season actually. Okay. But having said all that, we've got so much risk and variance surrounding the whole environment of the squad, the players that are available, not available, injured, not injured, time that some of the players have had in the team, and all those things that we've talked about. So it just felt like if we could get a win, any win, that would be great. Even a draw wouldn't be a disaster. And then, as I say, the season will grind on and towards some inexorable kind of, denouement in the last few games of the season, and it's going to be really, really tight. It just feels like that may not be the case. It just feels like there was a gulf, an absolute chasm between the teams last night, and I'm going to touch on that in relation to both halves, not just the first half. An absolute chasm, really. And I don't want to get ahead of myself because that's not what we tend to do. We do treat the stats on their merits in every game.
You're
at
entitled,
a time,
Alan. Get ahead
and so
of
forth.
yourself.
But yeah, listen. I'll say this, right, and I'm going to regret it. I know. if we're 4 points clear or something, if we go like more than a win clear after the weekend, if Hearts take something that game, I'm going to call it. I'm saying that now.
Interesting. That's the earliest I've heard you call anything over the course of these 73
and probably
episodes.
the last
time. I should actually ask you before we move on to the finer details and I get James in. How was Celtic Park? You were up at the game. I forgot to ask you that.
Yeah, and thanks to the
wouldn't know it by the raspy voice, Alan.
Yeah, I know, I'm a bit hoarse. The lad who knows who he is, who sorted me out, very kind. Yeah, the way that the lighting show and all that, I know we make fun about the disco lights and what have you. The players were all on the pitch when You'll Never Walk Alone came on, and the green light went on the Huddle, and it honestly will live with me forever. It was absolutely sensational, that moment, and metaphorically as well as physically, the opposition were stood in the dark as You'll Never Walk Alone reverberated around. And the green lights were on the Celtic Huddle and the roar and the noise, and it was just fantastic. And I can't believe that wouldn't have had a negative impact on their confidence before the game even started. It was stunning. It was absolutely stunning in that regard. Then the noise just didn't let up, and just the singing and every song was a good old Celtic positive song. Celebrating the team as it should be.
Yeah, it definitely came across that way. There were times where I was cursing the Sky Sports coverage to shut up at the start of the game so you could actually soak in the atmosphere as opposed to hearing the two lads talk about the team news. But, James, and this is an important point, this is a midweek game. It's in 7:30 p.m. in British time, obviously not the same with you. But this was in front of the world. This was all eyes on the Glasgow Derby. There's no Premier League this week. Everybody who's a football fan was watching this game. And I've seen people who have previously taken the piss out of me for Scottish football and, thrown the usual shtick that you get about Scottish football at me, turn around and say to me, by God, Celtic are a really good football side.
Yeah, it was class. I mean, we look like a team that's well managed, well coached, with players that suit what they're supposed to be doing. I mean, it's everything that we've been talking about since we started this show that we've been hoping to see. And it's taken us a little while to get there, but yeah, it was really just enjoyable from start to finish. The theatrics, I mean, it just goes to show that these should always be at night from a production and from a product perspective. I mean, it's crazy that I'll add the opposite of Alan's awesome experience. So in the United States, the coverage is on this network when they cover the big games. It's on CBS Sports, which is a nothing network, generally speaking. It's not ESPN or one that even some people have access to. And they had this guy, he's Scottish, Ian Joy, name that doesn't ring a bell. Yeah, I don't even know what his background is, but he was the studio analyst before the game, and it was and they didn't even show a good chunk of you'll never walk alone. It was like, you gotta be shitting me, this whole thing going down that you guys were enjoying in the stadium, and I gotta watch this douchebag. And they had McGregor in as playing a number 10 in the midfield. I mean, it was just and that we were going to line up with a 4-2-3-1. So that gives it can always be worse than Sky Sports. So CBS Sports was even worse than Sky.
Yeah. It did. I mean, it all depends on your perspective from watching this game. But I guess we'll get into the actual game, and excitement aside, what actually happened in the game. Alan, I presume you haven't sat down and done your usual stats for this game.
I've been on a train.
What the hell are you doing on the train? Let's go.
3 hours from Carlisle to Leeds. It's very pretty, beautiful countryside. But yeah, 3 hours for one leg is quite excessive.
Yeah. So James, I'll let you do the heavy lifting when it comes to the stats in this game. Can we start with the right wing of Celtic, the Joseph Juranovic Abada connection with Matt O'Reilly sort of linking up with them as well? I mean, for me, this was Juranovic's best game for Celtic.
Yeah, so I did a deep dive this morning. I actually wrote a second piece. I usually only do one a week, but I wrote a second piece. So I did a really deep dive into Stats Bomb's OBV model for the game itself. I don't usually do that with granularity. I usually just kind of take a peek, and if anything stands out, do some additional diving in. So the easiest way I'll characterize it is that the breadth of performance was so good, meaning that it was across the board, different players in different components of their performance. So, for example, Juranovic, the value that he had defensively was very good. His passing was very good. His dribbling and carrying was very good. He didn't really shoot, so that component wasn't there. But there were a number of players with that kind of performance, which to me speaks to the fact of the system being and the fit of the players, like we talked about, or I mentioned at the start. The irony is, because I would have intuitively thought of the same coming out of the game, again, just being wrapped up in the emotional, the walk away. It was actually the left side that was more effective in moving the ball. So I think, and we can get into all of this, because I couldn't even believe it when I saw it, and I had to go back and watch video clips, and because the obvious narrative coming out of the game was how horrific Barisic was, and on second look, I think that was the wrong narrative. I think he had the obvious horrible, just stand there on the third goal. But outside of that, he actually defended Abada one-on-one very well, and actually shut him down from getting the ball into dangerous areas one-on-one. I mean, there were other times when, and again, this goes back to system. This goes back to, the way I was trying to think of a way to characterize it. It was like a three-headed Frankenstein of Derek McInnes, Livingston, and Steven Gerrard. Right. So they sat deep like Livingston would, but they didn't play zonal. They played man-to-man like McInnes would, but in the shape of Steven Gerrard's side. Like I walked away, and when I re-looked at things this morning, it was like, is that really what this guy's style of play is? I don't think it is, but they somehow ended up there with this Frankenstein. And I think that man-to-man weird marking that they were trying to do with our overloads and the movement that we had, and guy, I think his name's Michael Cox, wrote an article about it in the Athletic today, about, kind of drawing parallels between an Atalanta and using those wide areas and the overloads and the interchanging in the half space. And you saw that movement with O'Reilly out wide, and then Abada flipping in, and Juranovic making those runs through. So you ended up with a lot of 2v1s out there and runs. And again, they played a left back at center back. Bassey's doesn't have a lot of experience, let alone playing against this level facing this kind of system. And that was reflected in his OBV. Like, he had one of the worst defensive action OBVs in the game. So I think Barisic has become an obvious whipping boy for the big highlight play, which again, old keepers don't get off the line very well. So I think it was the other side of the pitch where they really struggled against us. Arfield's data was terrible. He did not offer much value at all. Diallo was not good. Tavernier was kind of muted. He wasn't really good or really bad. He was just kind of there. And if you look at the metrics for Jota, Hatate, and Starfelt, to his credit, the passing lanes down that side were just wide open, and we were breaking them down. And it would end up getting back over to the right, but at times, yes, I got into that long-winded apologies, but that it was so non-intuitive. I was blown away when I saw the stuff this morning, because I came away from the game kind of thinking the same thing.
Watching it in live, it seemed they were simultaneously quite wide, so they weren't compact. They dropped quite deep, and they were very passive. You know what I mean? It was just like, what are you trying to do?
That's why I called it the Frankenstein. I have no clue what they were trying to do. It made no sense.
At the beginning of the game, before the first goal goes in, it looked almost as if they were happy enough to sit back. But then as the game progressed, it was more that they literally just could not get out. I don't think their plan was to sit back at all. I think their plan was to try play some possession football, and they just couldn't keep the ball, because famously in the matches, the clip is being shared now across, and Barry Kirby has highlighted in the comments, McGregor literally calls Barisic a shite bag during the game, because he forces him back once more to play the ball back to center back. They just couldn't get out with the press. It was really impressive from Celtic. That's
why I didn't understand. This is where I thought it was. I saw the lineup. Someone had tweeted to me, about our ratings that we did, whether I was still a 7 once we saw the lineups, and I saw theirs, and it was like, I don't get it. Like, and then the way they started to play, like if they were going to bunker, like I think they did. I think, because we talked about this on the preview show, that they basically played similar to that against Aberdeen. Right. So they've, and looking at some of the Rangers supporters that I interact with on Celtic that are, in fairness, they've been nice to me generally. Their view of his style of play since he's come on is more passive, is more counterattack focused. And we talked about that on the preview, that was evident in the data, as I talked about with StatsBomb metrics. And so I thought that they would probably play for counterattacking, but not with the level of passivity. And then to select Arfield and Roof in that context, and play Bassey at center back if apparently Balogun was available. I don't understand. Like, it's so incoherent. I joked it was like a Neil Francis Lennon school of incoherence in shape and tactics and selection. It made no sense to me.
Under Gerrard, they'd play nominally three strong across the front, but the two would often be narrow, and one of the two might even be like an Aribo, who's really strong defensively. So to have two out-and-out wingers in Diallo and Ken, and to have them wide and high all the time, and then what was happening was, just like you say, there was the overloads. It was three, because the Hatate and O'Reilly pulled really wide, and then Juranovic and Taylor were getting forward, and then obviously you had the Celtic wingers. So you always had three up against the fullback, and then you had somebody like Diallo or Kent trying to kind of filter back, because they played two in the middle and then a 10. So it just completely outnumbered them in those areas. And I think most of the chances were cross balls into the box. Giakoumakis had 2 or 3 chances from cross balls. The goal for Labada came from a cross ball. So yeah, the other thing that really struck me, being able to see it in the flesh, was just the speed. The speed of the Celtic players was just far, far greater. And actually, what you learn, you do need to see players in the flesh, absolutely. And I never realised how quick Juranovic is. I mean, to see him in the flesh was lovely. Just the speed of movement, but his ability, his control, his technical ability at pace, which is great, was fantastic. But yeah, so Celtic have now got a very quick, agile, mobile team. James talks a lot about athleticism, and maybe there's a tendency for some people to think athleticism translates into having 6'3" guys that are really muscly. Actually, athleticism can be being strong enough, being having good center of gravity, good core strength. Don't have to be a massively huge, but you've got great mobility and pace around the pitch, and that type of athleticism Celtic have now got in abundance.
Well, and I'll give you an example of the incoherence. That is just amazing to me. So again, if they were going to set up that way to play defensive and then play the counter, you would think that they would want the person playing the 6 to be a ball distributing type of midfielder that can get the ball out. That's not Glenn Kamara. That's Ryan Jack. That's who we saw. And they did alleviate some of that. Now, some of that was game condition and all that, in the second half. We'll talk about the second half when we get there. But the insertion of Balogun and Jack did change the way they were playing to a degree, because it was so they made an adjustment that did have some kind of impact. And again, the relative degree is impossible to know and an area for debate. And this is where I think it'll be interesting what do we draw coming out of this game? How much of this was due to a manager who completely screwed up and got a ton wrong? And how much of it was, inherent superiority relative to talent levels and that kind of thing, and how much of it can change? How much of it can be? Are they capable of making the adjustments? That kind of thing. And that's all conjecture, right? I mean, it's all speculation, and we can analyze and try to figure it out, but. To me, that'll be the really interesting thing going forward, because I agree with you guys, what you said, that this could be an inflection point if it turns into kind of a spiraling thing, right? If confidence is shaken and when people reach adversity, we talked about this last season about adversity, that's when you realize what the resilience of an organization or a system is. And
well, they've played, sorry, James, they've played badly for 4 games in a row. Okay.
Yeah,
and I know, drop points in 3 of them and scraped a result.
I'll take some issue with that. So they played not great against Aberdeen. They played fine against Ross County, with the exception of one position. So again, if you look at all the XG and stuff, I mean, they basically completely destroyed Ross County, and McGregor
XG was 3-2.
That's not with stats, but StatsBomb was a lot higher, and Ross County, if you back out the chances that McGregor just basically, left them laying in front of the goal for them. It was almost like a 2 point.
But you can't have it all ways, right? We spent all bloody 72 episodes saying with the structural weaknesses, and you're only as strong as your weakest part, right?
Agreed.
So guess what? In the last
Yep.
couple of games, the 40-year-old goalkeeper, who by the way was at fault for the second goal because my buddy that got me the ticket, who used to play goalkeeper, said he's too far off his line, and that's how Hitati got it past him, right?
Yep.
Right. That's a 40-year-old goalkeeper's failing. The left back who doesn't want to be there, and we've talked about this. They're in the same spiral we were last season, a reluctance to sell players because they've gambled on Champions League money over filling the financial black hole, and they've got players that don't want to be there. He doesn't want to be there, and that's what happens when you're under pressure and you make mistakes and your head goes, and like they did for Barisic for that moment. So you can't have it all ways, right? They're not winning. They're not winning these games because of exactly the same reason we took Celtic to task last year, because of these structural issues that haven't been addressed coming to the fore.
I agree with you. That's why I say the question is, what do they do now, right? So absolutely the risks are there for this to spiral. It's if they make smart decisions from here. It's like the same thing I said.
Well, the window's closed.
Well, I get that, but they do have flexibility within selection. Like I said, even with Celtic in late October when we started the show 2 years ago now, was that we still had levers to pull that could ameliorate the meltdown. And if we started making sound, smart decisions and stuck with them, then we may be, but when these spirals start, you're absolutely, if they start getting out of control, absolutely, this could completely melt down. I don't disagree with that.
I'm gonna reel this in and take it back to the game and take it back to Celtic because Kevin 14 is getting into the comments, and rightly so, saying, "Enda, you talked me into scales, but I'm back to Taylor. He was top drawer last night." So just some top level stats on Greg Taylor's performance last night: 11 out of 13 ground duels won, 8 tackles, which is the match high, five interceptions, match high, 3 clearances, 3 fouls, 1. This was a really, really good performance from Greg Taylor. I think we have to give him credit where credit's due here.
Yeah, and Starfelt, and so with Taylor, he never looked uncomfortable, and I hope this is the making of him, because the criticism, I don't think it was a criticism, it was just an observation really about maybe the parameters and limits of his ability. Is that he doesn't tend to fare well in European games and in big matches like this. He just, because he's up against a more athletic, better quality of opposition. He's absolutely great to have in the squad to play the vast majority of Scottish clubs. But so tonight, last night, he's still a young player, Greg Taylor, in relative terms. So that this could be the making of him. And obviously, he was up against the greatest wonder kids in the world, and he did fine. He did absolutely fine. No problem at all. He didn't contribute a lot in the attacking third, which actually is Greg Taylor's strength in many ways. He's actually really good at creating chances, but just for sheer defensive play, for keeping shape, for sticking to task. Yeah, he was fine. He was really good.
I don't think there was a bad performance. Like when I looked at all the metrics, it was varying degrees of good, and this is where I go back to. When you see that kind of situation, normally that means that one side got the major stuff right, and the other side didn't.
Yeah, I mean, Jota probably didn't hit a very high benchmark, but we're probably quibbling at this point.
Agreed. Yeah, he didn't do a lot creatively, but he did a lot with that linking up and kind of the ball movement on that left side. So agreed. Yeah, his other metrics were muted for him. And that's also why Tavernier's weren't calamitous like the other sides to a degree, because Tavernier did okay, so.
I know you're wanting to get into this discussion around the system, James, but just as we move forward in the team, I want to ask about Matt O'Reilly and his contribution to the team. I've never seen it. I don't know. I keep seeing these new players like Kyogo and Atate coming into the team and thinking, God, I've never seen a player bed into a team and a system so quickly. And then suddenly Matt O'Reilly comes in, and I'm saying the exact same thing about him. If you look at the second goal, which I actually shared on Twitter, about the trigger runs that Celtic have for that goal, where Juranovic gives it to Abada, or I can't remember exactly the link-up play, but it falls, and it's certain runs, and Celtic have been making those runs over the last couple of weeks. Matt O'Reilly seems to just have figured it out instantly and just been the class needed to fulfill the role that he's actually in. I genuinely think Tom Rogic struggles to get back into this team over the last couple of performances from him.
Alan, if you want to take that first.
Yeah,
I don't want to yap too much.
No. What is obvious watching him to me now? You know, watching somebody very closely, is his brain just works quicker than everybody else. It's that simple. He sees things more quickly than other people. In some ways, he's cursed being in a 6'2" frame, because if he was maybe a few centimeters shorter, and he would perhaps have a little bit more pace, and then he'd probably be absolutely world class, you know, already, because he just sees things quicker than everybody else does. Not just passing, and his passing percentage has been below 80% in every game, because he tries very quick, very aggressive passes, and obviously they don't all come off, and other people's brains don't work at the same pace his does, which is another problem. But he's certainly, a step up League One to Celtic. I think he'll start to show some. He already has started to show some incredible numbers, because he's playing with better players who will make runs, and who will control the ball, and will see the space that he's already seen, and move into it. But it's not just that. He sees what you're going to do with the ball if he's defending you. So he sees which way your body shape is and which foot you're orientated to, where you've got, well, therefore you're going to go left, you're going to go right, and he gets a foot in. There's no fuss about his tackling. He doesn't launch into people. He just nicks the ball, and he just gets these little interceptions. Because I noticed that in his defensive data, it was quite low on duels, but he has a high number of interceptions. That's another clue to the fact his brain just works quicker than virtually everyone else on the pitch, and that is a hell of a gift, I tell you, because all the great players have got that. So if he can become stronger, fitter, perhaps a little bit more athletic, and then obviously experience, he's only a young guy, but already his numbers in the 2 games, I've made him my boy of the match in both games he's played so far, just because that's what the data said to me. I wanted to give it to Abada on Saturday, but guess what? O'Reilly's numbers across the board were just fantastic. So, looking forward to going back on this game. It'll be a scale down, because obviously second half especially didn't have a lot of the ball. But yeah, just that anticipation, that ability to see things that fraction of a second quicker than anyone else is his super strength.
Yeah, he's sort of like a mixture of Tom Rogic and David Turnbull and somebody else in there as well. I joked
that you
strings to his bow.
Kenny Dalglish, and it's more of a physical thing, because he's got that slightly hunched, bottom out. When he gets the ball, he's got that well balanced look, and he's already decided what he's going to do. That to me just looks like Dalglish in that respect. I'm not comparing him to Kenny Dalglish and saying he's going to be the same quality player. I'm just saying he just looks like him, the way he moves and the way he positions himself and the way he's ready and his body's open to that next action. But yeah, I think he's special. I already like becoming first name on the team sheet for me, I'll be honest.
Yeah, I genuinely I can't see Tom Rogic coming straight into the team with the way Hatate and O'Reilly are playing. James, Callum McGregor came back into this as well. I say unexpectedly, but I think most Celtic fans would have expected him to play with a mask on. I thought he was really good in a number of different ways. If you look at his heat map, he was literally everywhere. He was all over the place doing all different types of things. What change to the midfield did that make to what we've seen from Beaton, for example, at the weekend?
I think it's now again, this comes back to what drove decisions. So he makes us a lot more press resistant, I think. So just because of his movement and his ability on the ball, not only to move the ball on quickly, he's another guy, like Alan said with O'Reilly, that he seems to have that fairly quick decision-making gene. So he doesn't take time on the ball. He's very quick in moving it all along, and he's got the ability to beat somebody and carry the ball and break a press that way. So how much of Rangers deciding hardly pressing at all until I made a mental note of it at the time. I think it was the 37th minute before they actually exerted any kind of pressure on us whatsoever in the midfield. So how much of it was because McGregor was in that role? It's hard, impossible to say. I think he did what he does well. He just he made the plays he needed to do defensively. He broke up play a little bit when that was called for, and he moved the ball and distributed and linked up, and his movement was really, really good. So nothing spectacular, but again, that's what we talk about in that position. It's to facilitate the other players and connect with the back two and with the fullbacks when they come in this inverted role. And it just runs so smoothly when he's in there because of all of his strengths.
Yeah, I'm not comparing the level at all when it comes to this, but I'm just drawing from things that I've learned. I once had a coach who would do a drill with us, and it was just heads up football, where you were punished if you dropped your head to look at the football while you were playing. And it's an incredible thing when you try and do that. You're not even thinking about it. And I think Callum McGregor's one of many players now Celtic have in their team who play heads up football the entire game. He has his head up. He's looking what the options are, 3 or 4 options. O'Reilly's another one. Hatate's another one. Juranovic is another player that does it. They never drop their head. They know exactly what their options are before the ball gets anywhere near to them. And it's a real asset to have when you're wanting to play the type of quick football that Celtic are playing. We've spoken about the individuals and the sort of the skills that they have brought to the game and brought to this game as well. But James, the system that Celtic played last night, it was, and the reason I mentioned the eyes of the world being watching is, like you said, the likes of Michael Cox, who's a really big writer in Britain about tactics, and Celtic looked like a modern football team playing modern football that's well coached, and the system itself was so robust that once Celtic went ahead, I just didn't see them even conceding, never mind losing the game from the position. Right. So how much of this do you think was down to the individuals that we've named and gone through their different stats from last night, or how much of this do you think is down to Ange and his system? And if you want to call it Ange ball, you can.
Yeah, so it depends on how you want to take this. As Alan said, there's the 55% achievement level that we've reached, and conceptually I agree with that, meaning that and we've talked about this really since the summer, which is at what point are we in the adoption of supposed Ange ball, and that this has been a process, not a specific point in time. And I think yesterday was a display of the next step forward, given Juranovic at right back, Taylor at left back, that midfield. And I think what we didn't see yet, and again, this is the exciting part, to take this on the positive side, is that there's still a lot more that can come here. When you get Kyogo back, when you get Maeda up top, that level of pressing, imagine Jota with those two up front, that front three. Because as brilliant as Abada has been in certain phases of play, it hasn't been really with pressing. It hasn't really been in build-up play, that kind of thing. So when you have that next level of quote-unquote Ange ball, defending from the front, I think that will be the next leg that might even take us to that next step. Now, I think there's also a little bit of out over our skis analytically, meaning that as a per human being, we were due some positive variance, right? As Alan and I have been talking about, and Alan particularly, with these damn derbies for two seasons, it seemed like we were never getting any positive variance. Well,
honestly, that phrase was in my head after the game. That's much as have beaten it into me.
Right. So Hatate scored 2 goals on 0.07 total XG.
Yeah.
And one of them was a deflected shot. And one of them had a pretty significant keeper error involved. So that's not to take away from how great that was. And those were terrific elite level shots from Hatate. But there's context to this analytically, right? So and Cox covered this in his article. Right? It was funny. He's funny, like tongue in cheek funny. ironically funny. I mean, he's talking about how these patterns of play and these runs are so great, and on like half of them, he goes, "Yeah, this didn't turn into anything." I'm not great. I'm not. I'm not saying that verbatim, but Jota wasn't hit on or Jota didn't hit Taylor on the run, or so there's room for improvement still for this to happen as these patterns of play get more ingrained, as we continue to adopt a full level of personnel that are shaped, within the system to play the system. So that's the positive side. The negative side is I think that the euphoria coming out about the performance yesterday, which is justifiable and understandable, and I shared it yesterday. And when I woke up and I kind of did my deep dive, as I do with all these metrics and stuff, it was like it was really good. But I think it wasn't as good as everyone is kind of hysterically going on about. So, it's a dual-edged sword, meaning that, we probably got over our skis a little bit yesterday, but it's encouraging because I think there's a lot more that can come.
Yeah. To be fair, it never is. To be fair, it never is, Bryson.
Exactly.
But what it is, and I know you hit the nail on the head when you said this is a process, not a point in time. We're not going to reach a point in time where it's like, ta-da, Ange Ball 100% complete. It's an ever evolving process because personnel will change and new people will come in and people will leave and so forth. But what yesterday does is it sets a benchmark, and James always talks about benchmarks, and rightly so. He's very thorough and a proper trained analyst, unlike amateurs like me, right? So, but what does it sets a benchmark, and that benchmark was what we saw earlier in the season. We glimpsed earlier in the season what we saw in the 6-0 wins that we had, 5-0, 6-0 wins we had at home. You saw the possibilities. You saw what could be done here. And James said, "Oh, it was only St Mirren, it was Dundee, they're awful, blah blah blah." Right. So we've seen in that 45 minutes doing that against the best team that Scotland can throw at us, right? So that is an important benchmark. Okay, that ticks. That moves the needle in terms of progress. If we perform like that and get a similar 3-0, 4-0 home win against a good European team, you've pushed the dial forward another 5-10% as well. And it's those benchmarks we're looking for. Can you do it? Not on a rainy night in Stoke, but can you do it against good opposition, and then can you maintain it? So that's why it's important. And I agree with what you're saying. You look back and it's never as great as you thought it was, and the bad bits were never as bad as you thought it was, and that's why I look at so much data, because you inevitably find the grey kind of areas, but that shows you what is possible, because not every team can get that variance and take advantage of it, right? So once you've got that variance, what can you do with it? And they absolutely stuck the dagger in, okay, having got the breaks. Yeah.
Well, you raised benchmarking, so I wouldn't be me unless I offered a benchmark. So I went back and I checked every derby that StatsBomb has. So these are league derbies, so I don't have the cup final from December of 19. But this goes back to the beginning of the 18-19 season. And I just looked at first halves. Just, again, these just an interesting exercise. This is not, scribed in tablets handed down from the mountaintop. So it was the best XG differential for either side in a first half out of that sample, right? So that tells you the disparity. Having said that, right? So I went back, and one of the closest ones, it was actually the 12-29-19 game, where it was 1.14 to 0.29. So actually a little bit higher XG. Our XG in the first half was 1.08 yesterday. So again, we're talking
that's too low by that's too low, by the way. Yeah.
No, it's not. Yeah, this is the XG from StatsBomb. So again, it has to do with. So I'll give you an example. Instat had the game at 2.2. StatsBomb had it at 1.17, and I think Y-Scout had it at 1.8 something. And the main difference is the accounting for the positioning of defenders. So for example, Greg Taylor's shot had two people right in front of him and a keeper. It was a block shot. I think like Instat probably had it closer to Y-Scout, which was like 0.4. So that's a 40% chance shot, which if you're not accounting for defenders, where he was, of course, that's a high quality chance. So I don't want to get too digressed, but the reason why I get into this, we always talk about fine margins, right? So, and game state being something that's really difficult that we don't really have a grasp on analyzing. And we may never. I mean, there's probably going to be improved ways to do it, but Hatate's first goal is on a deflected shot, and if Aribo's pass is a foot to the right, Arfield has a one-on-one that he could have scored on, right? So they could be up 1-0, playing horribly up until that point. And that the reason why I got into that is that derby, 12-29-19, that was the infamous Boli Bolingoli derby where he was never seen from again afterwards, that they won 2-1. And it was, they took their chances and we didn't, kind of thing, even though we pretty much dominated them in the first half. We're probably not going to get in a circumstance against a team of this level where we're going to blow their doors off to a degree where if something breaks, this variant stuff that we always talk about, it can flip one way or the other and have a material impact on the game, particularly when it comes to sequencing. Absolutely great performance, but even within that, we're too close in talent levels that there's not going to be, particularly if they make some adjustments. I mean, they were so bad yesterday. I mean, so moronic in how they set up and selected. That's my view. They could be as bad theoretically, but I think it would be difficult for them to be worse than that. I think we'll get a lot better as we upgrade, but that's why I say it's going to be fascinating with how this evolves now, and whether they do kind of spiral from here. Because if I was them, they're some of the stuff is fixable if they had StatsBomb, for example, which they don't. But
some of it isn't, by the way.
No,
absolutely.
Come on to
that.
Yeah. Some of it isn't. Yeah.
The best way that I could probably say this in layman's terms is that Celtic were due a performance like this, and Rangers were due a performance like theirs.
Overdue.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
But that's what's brilliant about the performance is that it felt, and this is why I talk about momentum and how this could potentially be a sliding doors moment for the season, even though it is in literal terms with the switching of the leaderboard. But Celtic stepped up and performed to the level, the best performance that they have come up in a big game. They come up with when they needed to, and then Rangers crumbled. And I think that's very important when we talk about intangibles like mindset and like momentum and like the season switching focus onto Celtic now potentially being leaders. If Celtic can continue these performances, the momentum switch from this game could be huge. I just think the fact that Celtic produced the performance they needed to produce when they needed to produce it, despite all the things going on with the injuries, the players missing, that could be huge from just a personal standpoint when it comes to the players and confidence and the things that they can draw from it.
Absolutely. No, I agree with that. What pleased me almost as much as the first half was actually the second half. That's going to sound strange, so let me explain. So the first half wasn't a surprise to me because we've seen, as I said to you, we've seen glimpses of this. We've seen Celtic go at teams. And we know that at the other end of the park, we're averaging nearly 1 XG against in every game. And you'll look at the stats. And that, by the way, just as an aside, this game is a great example because 10 years' time, people will look at the stats for this game and go 3-0. My God, it was 11 shots to 9, and it was Celtic only had this low number of XG. And this is where, as James said, game state 100% explains that. You should almost have closed the book on the stats at halftime because that told you the story of the game. But the second half to me was very, very important because although Celtic, I don't even know if they had a shot. I can't remember them creating even much of a chance. They made the decision to fall back, to regroup, and almost. And I'm getting well out my lane here, sort of getting into some of James's boxing analogies. It was almost the sort of Ali rope-a-dope, right? It was almost like, okay, I could waste all my energy chasing you around the ring, trying to batter your head. But what I'm actually going to do is just let you take your best shot and see if you can land one. And it was a bit like, and I'm going to overload on the Matrix now, and my analogy is going to go all over the place. You know, when like the bad guy throws a punch, and Nero sort of goes, writes an existential tract on that punch before the next one comes in, because it was almost like that. It was almost like, what are you going to do to hurt us? We know we've got you where we want you. Can you actually do anything to break us down? And I think what would be absolutely demoralizing for them isn't the first half, it's the second half. Because we let them have the ball. We rested in defence, and it was wise, because Hatate's essentially, this is pre-season for him. These are pre-season friendlies as far as that guy's concerned, right? O'Reilly is getting there. He's adjusting to a much, much quicker league. McGregor's had his face caved in. Jota's come his first 90 minutes back off a long injury, hamstring as well. Giakoumakis is trying to establish himself in the team. So off the front six, there's only really Abada, who's just still a teenager nearly, who really are up to speed and fully like 100%. Right, so they were wise. We don't have a deep squad. We couldn't risk any more injuries. We've got some big games coming up, and important games and tough physical games like Motherwell away. So we just said to them, right, come on then, give us your best shot. And the fact that when Ryan Jack hit the bar, I actually turned and said, go on, shoot, and he hit the bar, and so nearly hubris on me. So fair enough. But then I think it was like a minute to go when a ball came into the box, and I think it was Goldson had stayed up for a corner, and he had a decent chance with a header, and he put it over the bar, and that was literally the only chance they created throughout the whole game. So to me, that aspect of we've given them the ball, we've said to them, take your best shot at us, and they've failed miserably, is the most demoralizing aspect for them, even more than the first half.
Yeah, I thought James McCarthy was quite good when he came on. He made a couple of good interceptions at the time, and I mean that's what he's there for. That's his job when he's off the bench. And genuinely, I know we sort of criticized the performance at the time. If that's what he's used for, he's a good player to have at your disposal. A Premier League experience to come off the bench and be a breaker-upper and not expect them to do anything else for the final 30 minutes of a big game that you need to see out. It is a good sort of aspect to have in your team, especially when you haven't really got that between Kyogo or between Hatate and O'Reilly and Rogic and Turnbull and McGregor. McCarthy is a completely different animal. So if you can bring him on for the final 30 minutes, I don't see what the harm is having him at all, James.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to use him, that's the role to use him in. I suspect he'll be behind Bitton and Itaguchi in that role as everyone gets back fit and firing. But yeah, I mean, that's the kind of situation you're going to, we almost seem to go more of a dual pivot than when Soro came in. Yeah, I mean, that's the way to use them if you're going to. I'm less emphatic about the idea than you, but that's fine.
No, I've said, he looks to me like he's a special, to use the American sports jargon, he's a special teams player.
I'm converting you. American sports terms and boxing. My goodness, Alan, this is horrible.
I do try and keep learning. Even at my age, I do try and sort of, And Bitton, I'd almost have Bitton in that role as a special teams player. If you need someone to come on, and perhaps a bit of variety in passing and so forth, or just bulk up with a bit of height as well. I think both of those players can offer very different things as special. Because what I'm excited about is if we get Turnbull, Rogic back, is you could almost have O'Reilly at 6, or even Hatate at 6, and Turnbull and Rogic in front of them, and just kind of mix it up a bit, because I don't think it really matters actually. I think the movement is so intelligent that it'll work out.
Yeah, especially against kind of bottom half teams that are going to bunker. Absolutely, yeah.
If you want to just keep possession, there's no reason why you couldn't have a midfield three of that. Before we finish up, special mention for Giakoumakis. I thought he really impressed. Not in the sense of, you know, he was a 10 out of 10 performer, but I don't know what it seemed like being at the game, Jim or Alan, but he seems to be everywhere. He seemed to work his balls off. He got in good positions. Unlucky not to score. Really, really unlucky in the first half, to be honest. And he is what you want from a big man up front. He's strong, he's brave, he throws himself about, he gets stuck into the defenders. And I do think Rangers were actually quite scared of him. There were a couple of times when Goldson was doubling up on him with the fullback, whichever side he picked up.
Yeah, I mean, he's well short of his kind of my 900 minute benchmark for absolute sort of conclusions, but I'm kind of reconciled to the fact he's going to essentially give you two things. he's got a special skills, and he's got two of them, right?
Can I guess what one of them is?
Go on.
The run across the 6-yard box.
If you get the ball to him, that run across the 6-yard box, and you get the ball to him, and he doesn't have to take a touch, and he doesn't have to think about what he's doing, he's going to score some great goals. And I think you'll have to get a dozen a season based on the type of chances and number of chances that a team like Celtic create. And then his other great super strength is just I think, as I say, I keep using the Gordon Strachan phrase. He's just a right good teammate. He just works his socks off for the team. You know, he covers the ground. He tracks back. He never hides. He puts a shift in. He battles, and I think, you know, and he's just a pest. He's just a pain in the neck, you know. So I think those are the two things he brings. I don't think he's going to bring anything else to the table. Frankly, it's going to be those two things, really.
James, your thoughts?
Yeah, again, it comes back to system, which is if you have people that are smart and hardworking and willing to follow a smart, hardworking manager's instructions and work the system, that makes things really difficult for the opposition. And I think, you know, what we've seen from Giakoumakis is he's playing his role within the system the way he can with what he has and doing a good job within that context. But he's not Kyoko. He's not, you know, Maeda. And that's no harm to him. You know, we all have our limitations. I'm not either. So, you know, I think he contributed what he could in the context of the system yesterday. And in fairness, you know, McGregor, who had a bad game overall, that was his one good save, was off of the cutback cross from I think it was Abada, that set up Giakoumakis for what Alan said. He didn't have to think about it. He just had a really good strike of the ball and put it in a good spot, and, you know, McGregor made a good save on it.
Yeah, not much you can do when the keeper does pull off a couple of saves as well, if you've done your best to try and get on it. Before we finish up, anything else you just want to bring up on the derby before we move along to mundaneness of weekend games against Motherwell and the likes?
Well, as I was on the train and did my research, right, because I was on the train for bloody hours, I do want to use this because I'm looking down on my phone because this is in notes on my phone. So, like, right, I do want to talk about it. So I wrote beforehand about, and I've talked about this a lot, about their, you know, the ability, the lack last year of Celtic putting them under any pressure, and how easy and it was for them. And I'd keep banging on about this, not out of hubris, because it's actually, these are quotes from Rangers players, right? All I'm doing is telling you, reporting what was being said. So this is Tavernier, right? This is Tavernier after they lost to Hamilton, when they collapsed. They were, 2019-20 season. They beat Celtic in the New Year game, and they were 2 points behind with a game in hand, right? So it was absolutely game on, and then they just crumbled. Okay, and Tavernier said, whenever anybody puts us under a bit of pressure in Scotland or gets in our face, it seems to affect us too much. That's the captain. That's the captain saying, when they're put under pressure or people get in their face, it seems to affect them too much. Okay, and then you know, as we know, last year was a procession. Celtic were a joke. They rightly won the league. They were never at any point under any pressure at all from their own fans, from any fans, from any team for that matter. And then we come roll over to this season. It's the same group of players, right? There's been one or two changes, but it's essentially the same group of players. And, you know, after more about poor performances than poor results. I think this was after the home game against Aberdeen, but I might be wrong. This is Goldson. Goldson's the leader of the defence. He's the vice captain of the team. Okay, he's their best defender. And this is, I think, after Gerrard was leaving. So Van Bronckhorst was in the stand. New manager to impress. We know the new manager was there, and you would hope the players would want to impress him. But after that performance, we need a change. We need a spark. I don't want to say this, but I feel we've lost a bit of hunger. We've lost a bit of hunger. All of a sudden, we're champions and don't need to work as hard. That's wrong. I felt that's crept in all season. We've not been good enough for the whole of the season, and hopefully a new manager can come in and give us a spark. And he did. He did for a few games. So, they crumble under pressure. This is not me being a critical Celtic fan. This is quotes from senior people in the dressing room, okay? What did the manager say after last night? He said, very disappointing. It seemed like it was the first Old Firm we played, which, to be fair, he's right. If it had been an Old Firm game, it would have been the first Old Firm that we played. But anyway, moving on. We know what we have to do, the environment we go into and the pressure we get, but it seemed like we weren't ready for it. We weren't ready for it. You see the way we gave the goals away. It's sharpness. Sharpness, my words now, sharpness tends to disappear under pressure. I can't say otherwise. Not going with your man, not being ready for the battles, it was unbelievable. Okay? Now, that isn't going to get any better when you've got 4 key players that don't want to be there. And you saw it with Barisic, Morelos. I don't know if Morelos wasn't on the pitch, right? Kent's numbers this year in the SPFL are worse. He might as well be playing for Livingston in terms of his actual attacking XA and XG stats, and then good old Goldson, who's lost his hunger. These are again. I saw this. We saw this with Celtic last season, right? And that's why it's from that perspective I'm speaking about. I'm not throwing mud here. These are their own people's words. I'm telling you this. We saw this with Celtic, right? We saw Ayer, Edouard, Christie, and Cham. Okay, you can't say they weren't trying. You can't say that they didn't go out and didn't do a professional job. But when the pressure's on and you're absolutely up against it, and you're in a place like you were last night, are you really going to give absolutely everything when you don't want to be there and your heart's not in it? And we know from last year, our own players, that they don't. And these guys are no different. They're human beings. They probably feel much of the same thing. That's their biggest issue. They might put round pegs and round holes, to James's point. They might put Sakala on the wing rather than the kid who maybe they have to play contractually. Who knows? But you're not going to fix that.
Did you give the team talk last night, Alan? ready to walk through a brick wall for you there. Yeah, big time. And that's one of those things as well. If you look at it from a Celtic perspective, I really felt the players stepped up last night. I really felt that was a marker from them. They had something to prove, and I sort of tweeted it from the breakdown Twitter account. It's that famous Jock Stein quote, and sometimes these cliches can come into it, and you don't want to get into like the fandom of everything. But that quote where the jerseys do not shrink for inferior players, we saw that last year. They didn't shrink for players that didn't want to be there, and I really, really felt last night was a performance. And maybe I was getting too overly emotional about it, but I really felt that was a performance that the players showed that they belonged in the Celtic jersey.
Yeah, I mean, what you saw, what I think you saw last night is an intersection of a team that is becoming coherent under a new manager, but still has a long way to go. By the way, the potential is frightening here, and I mean that in a really positive way. With a team who is on its way in terms of decline because the players have been through their cycle with the club, whatever the reasons are, and they've gone from having a very well coached, well drilled, organized system into one that's less so. And we saw that almost the ships passed in the night last night and going in different directions. And I think that's probably where the optimism comes. Not the fact that it was 3-0, not the fact there was lots of fun to be had. It's the realization that those intersections that they may be moving in opposite directions far quicker than we perhaps realised.
Final word to you, James.
I think that's the more likely scenario. I do. I'd like to see them not do well against Hearts on the weekend. That would be that's the next kind of, because that's walking into, if everything that Alan just said, and I think it's reasonable to think that scenario is could unfold or is unfolding. In fact, we should see things not improve materially this weekend. And again, it won't have to do with the result. It will have to be how they play. What are the guys' body language, even some of this qualitative stuff. Because again, it looked to me, and with Alan's quote from their manager after the game, it looked to me like not only players that maybe didn't want to be there, but again, an echoing of our season last season. Players going, "What the F are we doing? Like, there's not a plan here." Or
there was a lot of on-field conversations. Let's put it that way. That were happening.
We don't get the plan. We don't, because if it was as simple as someone just marking a guy 1v1, that didn't look like what was going on in. That's why I called it the Frankenstein. It looked like a bunch of confusion and a lot of people pointing fingers at other people. So long may it continue. I hope that everything that Alan laid out is absolutely 100% going to be.
I'm excited at the possibility of Beningame and that wee rat Devlin snapping away Aaron Ramsey's precious ankles. That fills me with quite some optimism.
That's an angle I hadn't thought of. Yeah, that's great.
I mean, blood sports should be banned in my view, but that would be one that I think would be worth paying to see.
Yeah, well, as they say sometimes in football, the character of a team isn't judged by the hammering; it's judged by the performances after the hammering. And I remember Southampton got beaten 9-0 by Manchester City a couple of seasons ago or last season, and they went on a run. Was it Leicester? Sorry,
that was Leicester.
Yeah, but they also got beaten 9-0 by Man City a couple of seasons ago as well.
Okay,
it was under Huddle. They've been beaten 9-0 twice.
Your grandma could play in that league.
Yeah, either one of them, they went on a run of like 14 games where they didn't lose again. So I mean that's what it's all about, the bounce back ability and whether they can.
Agreed.
They'll either crumble or they'll thrive, and hopefully it's in this case for Rangers.
Timeline for them, I think they're comparable going into the weekend like we were coming out of the first Derby loss last season. I mean, that we went into Europe right after that and fell apart, meltdown.
I was going to say, when's the European games? How soon is that? Is that like next week? 2 weeks?
2 weeks, I think. Yeah, middle.
So you've got Hearts, Dortmund. You've got the possibility for a bad run of results here.
Yep. Let's hope so. That was episode 73 of the Huddle Breakdown. I might keep tabs on how many episodes now we get in while Celtic are still top. So that was the first episode of Celtic ever being on top while the Huddle Breakdown.
I hope I've lost the rest of my hair by the time we're in that position.
Let's hope we get another 73. That's all I want is 73 episodes of the Huddle Breakdown while Celtic are on top of the table. My thanks to everyone who has commented and watched live on the YouTube channel. If you want to get more of these videos, just hit the subscribe button below and you get notified every time this and other videos go live on the channel. And you can get the podcast on Spotify, iTunes, and the usual places as well. Alan, James, this was a pleasure. The happiest podcast I think we've ever recorded.
It was.
It was.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you both.